continue the adventures of the Volsungs, and we've gotten quite far actually. You know, in the family tree. So coming from Odin, the ancestor, to Sigi, to Reri, to Volsung, who gave the name to the whole dynasty. And then it kind of starts to begin a little bit complicated. Like we have step-parents and stepfathers and step-siblings and half-siblings and so on. And that was the case very much so also in the Volsung family. So people got married or didn't get married, still had children, got married, one of the spouses was killed or died or whatever, there was another spouse, and so we have a lot of confusion in a sense. And this is why, one of the reasons why I sent you the link to the flashcards. I mean, silly as it is, but if you want to kind of like remind yourselves who is who and so on. But I also hope that this family tree somewhat helps to explain or allows us to understand what is going on. The main thing is here that the Volsungs are a strong, proud family, and there tends to be in each generation there tends to be a Volsung that is stronger and more substantial than the siblings, and kind of like rises to be the representative of the Volsungs. So Volsung, just to recap a little bit, Volsung had 11 children, 10 sons and a daughter. Sigmund and Signy, the daughter Signy, they were twins actually, and then the 9 brothers, they were substantial, handsome and strong, but Sigmund and Signy were somehow more so than the others, and the 9 brothers of Sigmund and Signy, they end up dying, being killed when they went to fight Signy's husband, King Siggeir. Okay, so Signy had been married against her will. The father had wanted to arrange a political alliance with King Siggeir and married his only daughter to him. And Signy didn't want it, and bad things happened because this forced marriage. And what we are finding in the saga of the Volsungs, what I think is a neat thing about it, is that people are not either good or bad. A lot of especially the main characters are a combination. So this is a good king who is very strong, a strong leader and fair in a way, but then they can do something very foolish at the same time, like marry your daughter against her will. And yet he was trying to build his empire, so to say. Okay, so what we end up having is Signy and Sigmund have a child via incest. Sigmund doesn't know, but Signy does know, and she does this shape-shifting thing and goes to Sigmund in order to produce a strong, handsome Volsung who can then have revenge against the king who had killed the father and the 9 brothers. So it's kind of, disgusting. But that's what she calculated, that this is the only way of getting a a strong Volsung who can then pick up the mission and kill King. She was married to King Sigurd, and they had children. Signy and King Sigurd had children. Boys are mentioned. Signy, what's the end of these children that Signy has with King Sigurd? They pretty much all get killed by Signy. Signy authorizes the killing of these kids. Remember, she first sends two of the sons to Sigmund when Sigmund is living there in an underground dwelling, and sends two of her sons there to kind of test them about whether they can be Volsungs, and they failed the tests. And of course they were just half Volsungs because their father was King Sigurd. And Signy says, just go ahead and kill the kid. Kill the kid. These are like 10 years old. And it's very, very cruel. And of course, this is a saga, it's not necessarily true. But there is a lot of this murderous attitude. So Signy is just, okay, he wasn't a Volsung, kill him. Then we end up having Sigmund and Sinfieldly. Now this is father and son team, where father is also the uncle of Sinfieldly, because we had that incest here. So Sigmund and Sinfieldly, they lived together for a long time there in Sigmund's dwelling, and King Sigurd doesn't know about the fact that Sigmund is the father of Sinfieldly. And they end up going to the palace, the mead hall of King Sigurd, where there are a lot of his men, and they end up going there to avenge the fact that Sigurd had killed Sigmund's father, Sinfieldly's grandfather, and the sons, the 9 sons. So they go there, and there are these 2 young toddlers, probably, which are sons of King Sigurd and Signy, and they're just playing there, and they find that there are these 2 men, Sigmund and Sinfieldly, hiding there in an anteroom, and the kids are, it's the saga. It kind of describes how the children are playing, and these are innocent children, obviously, but they go to, one of them goes to the father and says, oh, there are 2 men there, and then they come and see who they are. They suspect, Sigurd suspects treason and comes and sees, and then of course a fight starts. But it's Signy again who says, kill those kids, they tattled on you. So she's a cruel mother, and so the only one she doesn't order to be killed, as far as we know, is Sinfieldly. But she also has been unhappy all her life, and she chooses to commit suicide. So we have infanticide, child's murder, and we have suicide. Signy did not have to walk back to the fire. After the fight, there was this fire where King Sigurd died, and a lot of his men died, and Signy makes the choice of walking back there and dying with her husband, whom she has loathed all her life. So it's pretty gruesome. And of course, at that point, then we have Sigmund and Sinfieldly left, and Sigmund marries. First marriage. This was not a marriage. She did not marry her sister. She just had a kid with her without knowing. But that's a theme. That sort of incest is a theme in classical literature as well, quite often. So Sigmund then is a little bit older and ends up first marrying Borghild. He wasn't that old then, and they have two sons, Helgi and Hamund. Nothing is really said about Hamund in the saga. Helgi gets a little tale, a story of what happens to him, what he does. He seems to be a Volsung, and then at some point at the end of Helgi's story, the unknown author of the saga just says, and this is the point where Helgi exits the saga. So he doesn't get like a prominent role. The prominent roles are left for Sigmund, Sinfieldly, and then especially Sigurd, and these are all half-brothers. So Sinfieldly dies, and do you remember how he dies? He gets poisoned by his stepmother, Borghild, and that is because Sinfieldly has killed Borghild's brother. So it's kind of like, this is the revenge culture. They first have a big funeral for the killed brother whom Sinfieldly has killed, and then Borghild during that funeral feast, then ends up poisoning, or after it ends up poisoning Sinfieldly, because Sigmund tells her that this is what happened. Your stepson just killed your brother, and she feels she needs to revenge. This is an endless cycle of revenge, murder, revenge, or killing or murder. There was a big distinction like we have today: killing or murder, revenge, and then again killing and murder, again revenge, and so on. It's quite gruesome. So Borghild kind of, Sigmund tells his wife to leave. He wants a divorce. Borghild leaves and then dies very soon. So Sigmund will have another marriage, and that is to Hjordis, who is a princess, a beautiful young princess, and at this point Sigmund is already quite old. So Hjordis actually has a choice. Hjordis' father it gives her the choice. There are two men who want to, or actually more even, but Sigmund is known because he's a king. So the father gives Hjordis a choice. So which one do you want? And I'll act accordingly. Unlike Volsung, who had forced Signy to marry, so we have a situation where Hjordis chooses Sigmund over this other king, and Sigmund is famous and probably still quite handsome, even though he's older. Hjordis says, "I'll take Sigmund, even though he's old," and they end up having a son who then becomes Sigurd, the dragon slayer, the very key part of this whole saga. But before Sigurd is born, Sigmund himself dies, because he dies in a battle, and all through this we have Odin, the ancestor of the Volsungs, appearing and disappearing, and he appears in a disguise, often as an old man, and he comes and he does something, and then or says something and then disappears. And his appearances and disappearance, especially the appearances, they are kind of at significant key points of the story. So let's go through this kind of like looking at what happens in each chapter. And first of all, we left at chapter 8, which is Sigmund, is on page 44. Sigmund and Sinfieldly don the skins. We're kind of like rewinding back to the time where Sigmund, the father, and the uncle of Sinfieldly are living together in that underground grave before Signy and King Sigurd die, and before the story continues. So they live there, and there are these very interesting incidents that are not part of like the main plot, but they're very interesting because they tell something about just the nature of these Volsungs and the nature of their culture. There are these spells. They live there, and they're kind of like they make their raids. And at all this time, Sigmund is training Sinfieldly to become a Volsung, to become a substantial warrior, a substantial leader. And they go to this place where there are 2 sleeping men, and they had wolf skins hung over them in the house, and only every 10th day could they shed the skins. So we talked about this kind of like blurred lines between the human and the non-human animals. So a lot of times we have like in this case human becoming non-human, becoming this wolf character, and that being kind of concretely shown by the fact that they have these wolf skins and they cannot get rid of them. Of course, this can be seen as a metaphor that we may sometimes, do bad things under a disguise of something else, and that is explained here as part of a spell. So they go and they have they're doing these little raids, Sigmund and Sinfieldly, the father-son pair, and they learn to he's teaching Sinfieldly to fight, but actually it turns out that Sinfieldly is a good fighter, even without the father showing him how. Of course, they don't know that Sigmund is the father, neither of them. Only Signy knows, and they learn later because Signy tells them before she dies. And they go and they say, okay, if we meet 7 men or more, then we'll call for help from the other one. They went their separate ways, and Sigmund calls help when he's fighting 7 men, but Sinfieldly doesn't, even though he's fighting 11 men. and that was just, and Sinfieldly just kind of arrogantly says to Sigmund, so because Sigmund is like, why didn't you call me? You were supposed to call me and ask me for help. And Sinfieldly says, well, you called me when you were fighting only 7, and I kind of wanted to show that I can fight 11 on my own. Sigmund didn't like that, and so on page 45, Sigmund bit Sinfieldly in the windpipe and hurt him really badly. And then what happens is then Sigmund is given this kind of like the vision by Odin. Odin sends a leaf to Sigmund, and first, Sigmund seeing two otters, no weasels, weasels fighting with each other. The one got hurt a bit in the windpipe, and the other weasel goes and gets a leaf and puts it on that wound, and the weasel is healed. And so then Odin sends a raven. Odin has these ravens that are his pet messengers, and he sends a leaf to Sigmund, and Sigmund puts it on Sinfieldly's windpipe, and Sinfieldly gets better right away. So these kind of side stories, they emphasize the culture where there weren't doctors or those kinds of formal healers as we have today, hospitals and so on. So it was the nature where people were drawing the help and resources, and again the blurring of the connections between human and nature is kind of shown in this leaf, little story about the leaf. Okay, and so we already talked about when Sigmund says, okay, you're trained enough, we're going to go and avenge our father's killing. Revenge is there, and that's what they do. So then we have, that was basically the chapter 8, and moving on to chapter 9. This is where Helgi, who is Borghild's and Sigmund's son, he marries Sigrun. Another Sig name, remember it means victory, and this is a woman's name. And what is interesting about chapter 9 is this is kind of like the side story about Helgi, who then later on the chapter 9 ends, and he is out of the saga. He married Sigmund and became a famous and excellent king, and he's out of the saga. But what happens here is this interesting ritual insult on page 49, where the opposing sides of the ensuing fight, they just tell these insults to each other. And what we learn here is like insulting a person for being a homosexual was a really bad insult in that particular culture. And this is kind of rings a bell with certain cultures in our, like, some kids may be saying, my dad is stronger than your dad, and your dad is something bad, and or your mother is something bad, and so on. So these kinds of ritual insults, they have a long history, and that is what I think was maybe the most interesting part of chapter 9. So chapter 10 continues with the Volsungs. Of course, Helgi was a Volsung as well. He was a half-brother of Sinfieldly and half-brother of Sigurd, who is then born later. So Sinfieldly goes off to his raids, and during one of his raids he ends up killing his stepmother's brother, and comes back and then the stepmother Borghild ends up poisoning him. So obviously at this point Sigmund is extremely sorrowful about his sons, because it was not only his son, but it was also his good buddy. They had been doing all this, lived long together, and he had taught him to be a good warrior and so on. So he's extremely sad when Sinfieldly dies. On page 51, the last paragraph, Sinfieldly drank and at once fell to the ground. So the stepmother Borghild has killed her stepson as revenge, because he had first killed the brother. Sigmund rose, and his sorrow was almost his death. He took the body in his arms and went into the woods, coming at last to a fjord. There he saw a man in a small boat. So we already know who, when there is this kind of all of a sudden there's a man, an old man with one eye, his face covered, in a small boat, or whatever the situation may be, we have Odin again appearing. So the man asked if he wanted to accept from him passage across the fjord. Sigmund said yes. The boat was so small that it would not bear them all. So the body was carried first, and Sigmund walked along the fjord on the ground. The next moment the boat and the man disappeared before Sigmund's eyes. This is what Odin does. He appears, he does a task. He took Odin, the ancestor of Sinfieldly, came to take him to Valhalla and to the place of the death or the dead, and Sigmund could not follow him there. So then he disappears. After that, Sigmund returned home, and now he drove the queen out. That is Borghild. A short time later, she died, so that was the end of her. Go and poison your stepson, and you will die yourself. King Sigmund continued to rule over the kingdom, and is thought to have been the greatest champion and king in ancient times. And yet he is going to, in the next chapter, he's going to remarry. He marries Hjordis, and this is interesting because also King Lundi wanted to marry her, and she is the daughter of King Eilimi. And this seems like a sensible king, for these stories, these sagas. He seems to be a pretty sensitive and sensible king. Allowed the daughter to choose between King Lundi and Sigmund. So again, Odin appears when. Because King Lundi was not happy about the fact that Hjordis had chosen Sigmund over him, so he attacks, and they have a fight, and Sigmund is doing extremely well initially, but then on page 53, the second paragraph, the battle had been going on for some time. Hjordis has been sent with Hjordis and her help maids have been sent to a forest to be safe from this fighting, and so we have the fight between King Lyngvi, who challenges Sigmund, and they have a fight, and so here we go. The battle had been going on for some time when a man came into the fight. He had a wide-brimmed hat that sloped over his face, and he wore a black hooded cloak. He had one eye. Now this is enough for us. We already know that this must be Odin. He had one eye and he held a spear in his hand. This man came up against Sigmund. Sometimes Odin does things that are kind of like, why did he do that? These are your people. But he does that. And he came up against King Sigmund, raised the spear before him. When Sigmund struck hard with his sword, it broke in two against Odin's spear. Then the tide of the battle turned, for King Sigmund's luck was now gone, and many of his men fell. The king did not seek to protect himself and fiercely urged his men on. Now it was, as they say, no one is able against many. So Odin appeared to Sigmund, and Sigmund breaks his sword against Odin's and knows that, okay, this was a sign that this is a sign for me to know that my luck has turned, and at that point his luck in this battle turned, and he ended up dying. And when Hjordis comes to see him, Sigmund says, you are expecting our son, and go and this is on page 54. The king said, you are carrying a son, raise him well and carefully, for he will be an excellent boy, the foremost of our line. This is Sigurd. Guard well the broken pieces of the sword. From them can be made a good sword, which will be called Gram. And again we have an inanimate object, which was Sigmund's sword, and Sigmund tells Hjordis to give it to Sigurd when he asks for it. And there's some magic about this, because this was a sword that his father had carried, and that had, whose breaking had kind of changed the fight. Now, this entire war between King Lyngvi and Sigmund was fought over a woman. And this is not the first piece in world literature where something like that happened. But it shows that she was extraordinarily beautiful and wise and what have you. And she chose Sigmund, and out of that marriage comes Sigurd, who is then going to be, in a way, delivering, like Beowulf did in Beowulf, delivering people from a bad worm or serpent. So Sigurd is born in chapter 13. And here we have, again, Odin making an appearance on page 56. So Sigurd needs a horse, and a man appears, and as a bearded man. This horse is descended from Sleipnir, and that was Odin's 8-legged horse. So we know that this is Odin again. He must be raised carefully because he will become better than any other horse. And then again, Odin disappears. This is page at the bottom of page 56. The man disappeared then. Sigurd called the horse Grani, and he was the best horse there ever was. It was Odin whom Sigurd had met. So Sigurd is gaining these important objects, inanimate like the sword and animate like the horse, Grani. And we always know if something has a name, it's got to be really important for the entire story. So we are entering this part of the story where Sigurd has been Sigurd has been born, he has grown, he has acquired a horse, a magical horse, and a magical, has been promised a magical sword. He doesn't have it yet. But at this point we're kind of introduced to an interesting cultural custom of that world, where Sigurd, he was Sigmund's son. Now Sigmund is now dead, and Hjordis is not dead, but in that culture, very often noble children were fostered by somebody else, and Sigurd was sent to be fostered by Regin. We've got Regin here. He was a relatively important person, but the reason why they did these kinds of things was because they wanted to build connections with, like political reasons, they wanted to build connections with other people. And okay, if somebody is rearing my child, that means that that person is favorable towards me, we're sharing some land or what have you. And so it was kind of a political gesture, political means to gain good connections. So in a sense it was kind of cruel towards the children. They were sent away from their own parents, but they were educated by this foster parent or foster parents, and they gained a lot of that kind of benefit from the deal. But it is kind of weird. So in a sense, if you are wondering why Sinfieldly was educated to be a fighter by Sigmund, and you might think, what does King Sigurd think about that? Because he didn't know that Sinfieldly wasn't his son. Anyway, it was part of that culture that children were sent away and brought up by someone else. So Sigurd is sent away by his mother, and mother marries a king, later on King Alf, and relatively soon after Sigmund dies, actually even before Sigurd is born. But they send Sigurd away to be raised, fostered by Regin. And Regin is an interesting guy. In some accounts he is a dwarf, but it's not made clear here in the text itself. But Regin is one of three brothers. Fafnir is the other brother, and Otter, which means Icelandic for otter, is another one. And what is weird about these three brothers is that Regin seems to be the human one, and Fafnir starts as a human, but turns into a serpent. And Fafnir is the is the main protagonist, Sigurd's main protagonist. He is the serpent, the worm, the dragon creature that needs to be slain, and we'll see why. And then we have the third brother, who is the otter, and he's someone who assumes the shape of an otter to go fishing. He likes to go fishing, and he shape-shifts himself into an otter, or is an otter. It doesn't become clear, but this is a really strange threesome of brothers. Fafnir clearly doesn't start as a snake in the beginning, or a dragon kind of a thing. And then there is this interaction with the gods. We've got Odin and Loki, and then there's a dwarf whose name is Andvari. And Andvari has a treasure, is watching a treasure, and he lives in the water. And if you we mentioned the Richard Wagner and his Ring Cycle, his opera that he based on this saga, and it has this or other Germanic sagas, and it has this dwarf figure who is guarding a treasure, and then things start kind of like going bad from there. So we have Regin, who is Sigurd's foster father, and he's teaching Sigurd really good things. He's teaching, I think they mentioned, he taught him chess, and he taught him runes, and he taught him the fighting, and so on. So that was kind of like the deal. I sent the child to be fostered, and then they learn all these skills. Taught him also several languages. So Regin was clearly an educated person, but then he had these strange brothers, and then we have the hoard of treasure, which leads to the death of Otter. The king Loki, which is or the god Loki, who's the trickster god in Norse mythology, he goes and kills this otter and brings the otter to these brothers' father, whose name is Hreidmar, and shows the catch, and then Hreidmar realizes it is his son in the form of an otter, and he says, okay, if you remember that there was this man money that could be paid when you murder someone, you kill someone, and you can get away from it by saying, okay, I'm sorry, I killed this person, here's the money here's the payment for it. So that was called the Were Guild. And the father, whose name is Hreidmar, he says, fill that otter, which is his own son, fill that otter with gold, and you can do that kind of payment. And it's never explicitly mentioned that he notices that it's his son, or that Loki, the king, notices that, Loki the god notices that it was Hreimar's son. But anyway, he goes and he needs this gold to fill the otter's skin and kind of like taxidermy, and he goes to Andvari, who is the dwarf who has the treasure, and takes it away from him, and also a ring. Now we are introduced to the magical ring. That's why Wagner called his operas the ring cycle, because it is about the golden ring and the treasure that ring represents, and whatever we want that to metaphorically represent. So the treasure is taken, and the order is filled by gold. And interestingly, Loki and the other gods, they take it to Otter's and Regin's and Fafnir's father and say, here's the payment here's the payment for the killed otter, and this is the were-guilt. And the father says, okay, there's a whisker showing from the it's not covered with gold completely. So at that point, then the ring is used to cover that whisker that was showing, because the deal was that it has to be completely covered with gold, the otter. So what we have is one of the sons is gone, killed as an otter. Then what Regin is left as totally in a human shape, but Fafnir is slowly turns into a serpent. And this is on page 59, where Regin tells the story to Sigurd, because Regin wants Sigurd is brave enough to go and kill Fafnir, the dragon or the serpent, who is Regin's brother. He needs to explain this whole thing. So that's why we get this tale here. And Regin says on page 59, the first one paragraph there, afterward Fafnir killed his father, continued Regin, and it was murder since he hid the body. This is again okay, I kill somebody and I confess, then it's not as bad as killing without confessing. And this was bad because he hid the body. Regin obtained none of the treasure. So the father is killed. So the gods kill the otter. This guy's father says, fill the otter with gold and you're good to go. The gods do that by getting Andvari's treasure. And then we have these two left, and the father. So Fafnir goes and kills the father, okay, so that he can get the treasure. And Regin is envious. So we are back to the envy, the jealousy. The brother got something that would have been rightfully mine also. So I obtained none of the treasure. Fafnir became so ill-natured that he set out for the wilds and allowed no one to enjoy the treasure but himself. He has since become the most evil serpent and lies now upon this hoard. Afterward, I traveled to the king and became his smith. That is Regin speaking. So Regin becomes the smith. And this is the story of how I lost the legacy of my father and compensation for my brother. So my father got killed by my one brother, and the other brother got killed by the gods. And gold has since been called otter's ransom and is spoken as such. And Sigurd answers, "You have lost much, and your kinsmen have been vile." So now we have the background story of why the serpent Fafnir needs to be killed, because he has taken Regin's part of the treasure, and Regin wants Sigurd to do the killing, and it is kind of an interesting twist here, because Regin is not himself he's a blacksmith, he's a smith. He is not someone who could go and kill his own brother, but he can send Sigurd to kill him, because he's a little bit cowardly in that sense. And so Regin makes a sword. Sigurd says, "I need a sword," and Regin, because he's a smith, he makes a sword. Sigurd tries it out by striking it against the anvil. It breaks. He says, "No, this is not good enough. Do another one," and he does that. That breaks again, and then Sigurd remembers that he has been promised to get his father's sword, and that's great. And Mom has that sword, the pieces of that broken sword that Sigmund broke when he clashed with Odin. And he goes to his mother Hjordis and says, "Hey, remember that sword? Could you give it to me now?" And the mother does give it to him, and he takes the pieces to Regin and says, "Since you're a good smith, do use these now and make a sword that is better than the two you tried to make earlier." And Regin does that, and that sword, Sigurd tries it, hits it against the anvil, it doesn't break. So it is clearly a magical sword, and so he's ready to go and kill Fafnir according to Regin's wish. But before he does that, he's not really eager to do it, because he hasn't been wronged by Fafnir taking the treasure. He's doing a favor for his foster parent, Regin. And he says, "I will do it, but I won't do it before I have paid back to the people who killed my father." And so my father, Sigmund. And he goes to the fights, and before he goes, he meets this person who tells the future, his future, and it's not really good, because Sigurd will meet his end also. But Sigurd goes and he wants to revenge his father's killing, and he goes and kills King Lungvi and his men. And King Lungvi, again, he was the one who had also wanted to marry Hjordis, but Hjordis chose Sigmund, and so then he challenged Sigmund and killed Sigmund, and then Sigurd needs to make this right, because that's part of this revenge cycle of the saga. So Sigurd kills Lungvi and also others. And we have, Odin's raven occasionally appearing here as well. And then he comes back, and Regin is like, "Now you promised to go and kill Fafnir." And Sigurd, after he has avenged his father's killing, he says, "Okay, now I can do it. Now I have done what I needed to do before I can go and kill Fafnir." So he has taken care of the honor thing by killing King Lyngvi and his men because they had killed his father. So now that's done. So he can start helping his foster father, Regin. It's an interesting thing, even though Sigurd has learned a lot from Regin, he doesn't really seem to like him all that much, and there is some kind of like, between the lines you can kind of read that these were not really, he didn't really respect Regin. He didn't respect Regin because Regin didn't go and confront Fafnir himself. Fafnir had become this evil person, had become an evil snake, literally. And it's not just a snake that we could find here in East Texas, we could find in our yard, but this is a snake that is just enormous, yards and yards long, and that's something that Sigurd needs to confront. Regin tries to say, "Oh, it's just a snake. You go and kill it." And Sigurd is like, "Okay, let's look at these tracks that this snake leaves when he goes every morning when he goes to drink from the fjord, from the water there, and on the sea, or the lake." And so he lives in a place, he guards his treasure, and he has nothing else in his life, but every morning he goes to drink water. And that's, predictable. So Sigurd and Regin, they decide that, okay, I'm gonna make these like ditches there, on the tracks where, dig these ditches on the tracks where the snake is going, and then from underneath, using my sword, Gram, I'm gonna kill the snake. Or that's actually what Regin asks him to do. And Sigurd is he's not really all that enthusiastic. I mean, it's a scary job to do, and obviously Regin is not going to help him. He's not going to be there. He is bold enough to order someone to kill his brother, but he's not going to participate in that. And at the same time, then Sigurd kind of gets this message again from supernaturally that he's going to, where does the blood go from that poisonous snake? He needs to dig more ditches so that the blood will go to those ditches and doesn't poison him. So he's there lying in that ditch. The snake comes slithering by above him, and from underneath he wounds the snake. Doesn't die immediately, but it dies slowly, and they have this interesting discussion. Fafnir, the snake, the former person who has become a snake, which is kind of like an interesting metaphor. If a person is ill, then we may turn into this. This is a metaphorical outcome for a person who is not so nice. So they have this discussion about several things before Fafnir dies, but he does, and then Regin wants to have the heart and eat the heart. Sigurd starts preparing the heart that he has cut out of the dragon, the snake, and starting to roast it or cook it or make it into an edible form to give Regin. And at the same time he touches, when it's almost done, he touches it, and he gets some of it on his finger and he puts it into his mouth. And I posted on Blackboard, I posted a picture of this in like, you know, it has runic inscriptions and also a picture of these, like a little cartoon, very old cartoon. So he sticks his finger into his mouth and he sucks it, and it has that blood of the dragon or blood of the serpent. And a miracle happens. All of a sudden he starts to understand the birds, the language of the birds. So what we have here is again that blurred line between nature and between non-human animals and animals. And language now becomes the shared feature between Sigurd and the birds. So he understands what the birds are saying to each other, and they're saying all these things that are like advice for Sigurd of what he should do. And they tell him that Sigurd is going to be a fool to having killed Fafnir, who is Regin's brother, to leave Regin alive, because Regin now could avenge against his brother's killing, even though he had ordered it, and he has gotten, you know, he will get that treasure, because Regin wanted that treasure. And now the birds tell Sigurd that you're going to be a fool if you don't kill Regin, because Regin might then revenge against, you know, your father's killing in order to keep the your brother's killing, Fafnir's killing, even though he had ordered it, in order to keep the whole treasure, right? And so what Sigurd does is he goes and kills Regin, cuts off his head, and that's it. So he now drew the sword Grum and cut off Regin's head. After that, he ate some of the serpent's heart and kept some, so it's kind of gross. And then he goes to Fafnir's, the serpent's lair, and takes that treasure from there and puts it on his horse. And first the horse is not able, there's so much treasure that the horse is unable to pull it. But then Sigurd figures out that the horse wants to have him ride it. So Sigurd leapt onto the horse's back and put spurs to him, and the horse ran as if unencumbered. So let's stop at this point, and we'll continue from here. Actually, on Thursday we're going to be finishing up the entire story, and I will send you everybody a notification about next week's test, which is on Beowulf and the saga of the Volsungs.